J. Warner Wallace is a cold case homicide detective who's been investigating cold case murders in Los Angeles County for over a decade. His work has been featured on Fox News, Dateline, and Court TV. Now, we join him as he applies his investigative skills to making a case for Christianity.
Okay, I suppose we should probably tell them. I'm going to tell everybody right now. So we're starting something new with this podcast. We've been doing
I'm sorry. Did we start right now?
Yeah, we already started. Come on. Listen,
I think I was looking like...
Get your act together. So anyway.
I thought we were going to... What about a tease? Do we need to do a tease or no?
No, we're not doing any of that anymore. So we're already recording. We're already on. And we're just going to leave all this stuff in. Here's what we're doing, folks. We are doing a new version of our podcast that was going to be much more relaxed and conversational because I feel like we have been a bit stiff. Here's what our problem has been. We've always been doing this like 28-minute thing for NRBtv, which is great. But it's very limiting. So here's what we're going to do from now on. We're just going to have the kinds of conversations we always have. And we're going to record those. And it turns out when... most of the time when we're talking about stuff, we're talking about stuff that has to do with God anyway. So we're just going to open those up. So, and this also kind of takes the limit off for us, right? I mean, we don't have to do 28 minutes. We can do an hour if we want. And we probably...
Well, we both kind of just run our mouths and just kind of ramble on, and it's hard to say things succinctly.
I know.
But be ourselves, because in real life, it takes us way longer sometimes to get to the point than we need to in 28 minutes when we're limited, especially if we're doing it in 12-minute halves. It's sometimes hard to hit our mark.
Yeah, so that means that a lot of people who are watching this on NRB are going to be going, what the heck's going on? And number two, they're going to think to themselves, well, listen, I'm going to, after 28 minutes, we'll have to take a hard break for you folks and then join us over on the YouTube channel, and you can pick up the rest of this. But what I was thinking of this last weekend, because we had Easter, and you were over at the house, and I have been always trying to collect, like what can we watch? It's not football season right now, and you know your mom, it's football's her favorite season. If there's a football game, she's going to want to watch it with me, and we say about we DVR everything and then we watch it all later. But if it's not, I'd like to have like a romantic comedy or something that we could watch that would have maybe an object lesson about marriage in it, or because we do so much marriage counseling. So I've been asking you. And you're useless when it comes to this. You don't know. You're just going to ask Olivia, your wife. You're just going to ask her, hey, what's a good, or, you know, I mean, how do you guys even pick what you're going to watch?
Well, we definitely major on romance. If for the most part, if the main part of the story is some type of romance that is interesting, then we're going to watch it.
So this is why...
And it doesn't even need to be that good. Any rom-com that comes out, probably we will sample or consider watching. If romance is not the major part of the story, then it needs to be a really good show for us to actually watch it.
What's the movie that, the silent, what's it called? The kind of a alien movie where they have to be quiet because all the aliens can hear wherever they are. It's not a romantic comedy.
Oh, you're talking about A Quiet Place?
The Quiet Place, yeah, The Quiet Place. That's what it is. Yeah, The Quiet Place. Yeah. So you haven't even seen part 2 of that because that's not something you think she's going to want to watch because there's no romance in it.
Yes, she's really not interested in it. I watched it with you.
Well, the first one, David, you watched the first one, but you still haven't seen the second one, and I waited forever for you to watch the second one, and I finally just said, forget it. I watched it with Mom. I'm like, forget it.
There are some things that if I want to watch, I'll just watch on my own, but if I'm by myself, I really don't usually want to just sit down and watch like a show or a movie. Even watching like a half-hour show just by myself is... I get like, I want to get going on to something else. I want to multitask. I don't necessarily want to just sit and watch. So if I'm just by myself, I usually won't watch very many movies. So it'll take me forever to see A Quiet Place Part 2 unless we're together and we watch it or I'm with somebody who's watching it.
Yeah, if you and I were watching it together. Yeah, and I save all the
if we're together, I'm with somebody else, I can sit still and watch a movie. But if I'm by myself, I'm already thinking about what else I could be doing. This is how lame we were.
We watched the first one. I was going to watch the second one with you with David for David's bachelor party. It's just the three of us. My son, your brother, and sure enough, we ended up watching the first one because you hadn't seen the first one.
Because I hadn't seen it yet. I was like the only one who hadn't seen it, so we all watched that one.
Because of Olivia.
But it's good.
It's because of Olivia.
It is good.
That's the
It is
reason
good.
why.
I think if she saw it,
Yeah.
I think if she saw it, she would appreciate it because
No.
A Quiet Place is
No,
artistic
you
in
are
its
wrong.
in the way it tells the story. But it would be hard to get her to start watching
Yes,
it.
you're wrong because I sent you a text and I said, "Hey, you should watch Yesterday," which I thought was a great kind of movie. It's an alternative universe in which the Beatles are, never existed, and this guy knows all the Beatles songs, so he becomes famous singing Beatles songs. Right? It's called Yesterday, and it's got a byline, and it's got like a second narrative of a romance. And so I sent it to you guys. Hey, you guys are gonna like this, and she hated it.
You know, you had told us about it, and my father-in-law had been telling us, "Oh, you got to see it, you got to see it." But I think the problem with that movie was we were having a hard time getting over. We didn't understand the internal conflict that the guy was having. It didn't seem like the movie really
Oh my
explained
gosh.
why was he so conflicted. Why couldn't he be in this relationship and be famous at the same time? You would have to put it in, you would have to explain that yourself. The movie did not really explain why is he so conflicted. This girl wants to date him and he wants to be super famous, but there doesn't seem to be any reason that he couldn't have both.
Why are you so serious about it? This is a romantic. It's a stupid comedy.
That's what we wondered of him. Why is he being so serious about this? Why doesn't he just date her and be famous at the same time?
Maybe. So I finally, after this conversation I had with her, where she's like, that was lame, not good enough. So I sent her a text, either yesterday or the day before yesterday, and here's what I said on this text. I said to her, I'm opening it up right now. I said, okay, watch this movie. It's called The Map of Tiny Perfect Things. It's an Amazon original, and it's one of these going back in time, like every day he's living the same day over and over. So it's got a kind of an interesting feel to it, but it's a kind of a love story between like high schoolers or early college age, whatever. Okay, so it's pretty relatively. Look, all these movies are going to have something from a Christian worldview. You're going to go, really? But sometimes they're pretty benign. This seems to be relatively benign as far as movies go. So I sent it to you guys. I sent it to her. I said, this one, we guarantee. All right? So this is what she wrote back to me within minutes.
She'd already seen it.
Yeah, I've seen it. I didn't love it. It was okay. Don't like Groundhog Days. I just wrote back to her. I said, I'm done with you because this is like this. I thought this meets every criteria that she had for a romantic comedy.
A few of those Groundhog Day movies came out around the same time, right? Because around that time that came out, didn't also Andy Samberg had, I think, a movie that was the same thing. He's reliving the same day over and over.
Yeah, that's true.
We saw another one.
So that's why she's got all those in her head and she thinks they all stink.
Oh, actually, you know what? I think I saw the one you're talking about. I think I might have seen that with her.
Yeah,
maybe
I thought
that's
it
what
was
I'm thinking
decent.
of. It seemed like there were several, and it was like I don't know. Somebody just got the idea that now everybody's got to redo Groundhog Day, and it was just too much. I think too much of the same thing. We need something different.
Well, okay, so I'm just about over sending her any. And listen, she was my go-to person for movies that I could watch with Mom, and I would always text her and say, "Hey, what's the next one?" And now she said to me on Easter that she's the one, for example, who sent me that ridiculous Crash Landing on You Korean.
Oh, that's got to be
opera.
one of the best shows. That's got to be one of my favorites of all time in terms of television shows.
Really? So you liked it too?
I think that's great.
Well, you used to like the old. What was the series about? The New Mexico Roswell. You used to like Roswell.
Oh, Roswell. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did she Did Olivia like Roswell? Did she like that?
Yes, I think there's enough drama and romance to hook her with that. I think what's good with Crash Landing on You is it is all a very slowly drawn out romance.
Yes, and it does seem like it holds.
And that is the primary part of the story. The only problem with that is it's a Korean drama, so if you don't like subtitles, you're not going to want to.
Well, you can't look away.
You may be hesitant to watch it, but I think it's worth watching even with the subtitles.
Yeah, and not only that.
And we always watch with subtitles on anyways, even when we're watching English
I do too.
shows.
Yeah, we do too. The thing about that too is that it's got very 1950s kind of Judeo-Christian values, even though there's nothing in the series that seems to be overtly Christian. But you can tell that the roles of men and women, the role of marriage, that stuff seems very consistent. And so we're talking about a Korean romantic soap opera that was really huge in South Korea, and is now on Netflix. But you just said you found what's the new one you guys are watching?
Yeah, I wouldn't say put it on the exact same level. We're watching another Korean drama. We've been trying to get into them because we love Crash Landing on You so much. But what we found is that a lot of the ones that people recommend have like supernatural elements to them that we just can't really get into. So we've been struggling to find a new one. We're watching one called Business Proposal right now, but we haven't finished it yet. But that
You
one's
think
a little bit more of a straight rom-com versus Crash Landing on You is a little bit more. There's a little bit
Soap
more
opera,
to it.
yeah.
I would say it's a little more artistic, and you can see they bring back. They have a lot of callbacks to earlier episodes.
Yeah, that's true. There's an interconnected timeline that that makes sense now because this happened earlier and you saw something happen earlier. You just never connected the dots. I think that any of these movies that are at least, so for me, my first choice would be something that's not action, but it's something that's mystery. Mystery is the thing I'm looking for. How do I connect dots? Because I'm always thinking if I was to write this, how would I have written it? And I'm always interested in mysteries and solving mysteries. That's what we do. Right?
Yeah, you're looking for the mystery, but see, we're looking for the drama.
I know.
We're there. It's all about the drama.
And it can't even be like a byline with her. In other words, if it's like a secondary aspect, no, it has to be the primary aspect of the movie. So
Yes.
I've now gone through everything that she sent me. We've watched all of it. I've even gotten to the point now, how on Amazon Prime it'll say if you watched this, these are like all the other movies that are similar. I think we've done most of those too. But anyway, let's turn a corner now from which romantic comedies stink to let's talk a little bit about something you mentioned to me several weeks ago, and then we had an argument running one day that Mom was like, "Hey, is this all you're going to talk about for the entire run?" And I'm like, "Yeah, maybe," because
Which it was.
It was because that's what we always talk about. It's just these different things we disagree about. But I think we've kind of come to some level of agreement on this, the interesting aspect of this, and this is the issue of identity, and what role does it play? I'm more interested in it in terms of like what role it plays in terms of making choices, like why decision making. Like I would have. I know I'm an apologist who writes books on the evidence. And I wonder sometimes. I'm 61. I'm going to be 61 in a month. I wonder sometimes, is this a way of thinking that is entirely set in time? That boomers like me probably find that more suitable to the way we think about things, but maybe millennials or Gen Z or Gen X, this is generations that don't like. Is there any evidence for this? May not be the first approach they make when making a decision. I think that in the past it's been, well, how do I feel about it? What experience have I had? And now I think we're in a generation where really it's an identity generation, where it's more about okay, do I want to be identified with this, or does this decision amplify the identity I've chosen for myself? So in other words, this has always been the case a little bit, right? I mean, I have a goatee right now. I don't always have a goatee. Apparently there's something about the goatee that I want to broadcast as part of my identity. We pick hairstyles, we pick clothing, we pick a car. A lot of that is because we want to be identified as somebody who would drive that kind of car. So
yeah, I kind of wonder if it's actually something different in terms of the underlying motivation of different generations, or just if it's the same kind of thing expressed in different ways. I kind of suspect, I guess, that we all are interested in questions of like self-worth, what's our own value, and I think all people want to feel like they're the main character of the story, and we all want to know what it is that makes us worthwhile, and we might answer those things in different ways, like over the generations.
yeah,
But I think when it comes to things that we identify with, we've just identified. I wonder if we all identify in different ways. We can identify through our family. Like growing up, we always like to say, "Oh, in the Wallaces, we do it this way. In the Wallace family, we do it this way."
Yeah.
So you could identify that with your family or the place that you're from, your city, your college, your country, or maybe you identify through your interests. Like I am a artist, I am a gamer, through your career. I think maybe we're just all identifying in different ways, and maybe how we approach like what should we identify with maybe is different, but I do think that we all want to be something.
Well, okay, so this
And
started from you. You said that you were talking to somebody, and I don't know what setting it was in, that said, "Hey, if I got to vote for that particular candidate in order to be a Christian with you guys, I'm out. Can't do it." And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? That it's not uncommon that people now have connected Christian identity with the Republican Party, let's say, or one particular candidate. And man, I'll tell you, the people who follow me on Twitter, I'll just be honest. They hardly ever talk about anything other than politics. And these are people who identify as Christians, but really, honestly, if you're watching their tweets, they really are identified politically. And I think that's part of our problem. I think young people they're so independent that they don't want to be told. We just falsely connected Christianity to any other number of movements, but especially political movements. I don't know.
I think that there's not always. I think that maybe it's our own. It's Christianity's fault in the way that we like communicate. But I think that anytime you associate something really closely together, I think it's easy to maybe mistake them for the same thing. So if you're just growing up and all the Christians you know all vote the same way politically, it's easy to assume that to be a Christian, it means to be part of a particular political party. And obviously there is going to be overlap, or there's going to be, if you have a certain political view that might influence your religious beliefs, or vice versa. Your religious beliefs, if you think that they're true, they should influence
Yes.
everything in your life.
That's
So
right.
it's not like anything can really stand totally separate. But I don't think that it's exactly the same, because then if there's a problem, you always associate Christians with a particular party, and now that party is embroiled in a scandal or whatever. The existence of that political party doesn't really impact the truth of Christianity necessarily. But I think it's easy to say, oh, well, that thing's bad, and I always associate them together, so they're both bad. And I think it's just easy to kind of make that mistake. I think.
Well, I won't ask you to mention who the candidate was, but what was it, do you think? So it's usually, if you get a candidate who's a jerk, or you just think this candidate's a lying jerk, okay, well, then you start to think, well, are all Christians? So I think the takeaway for me has just been, and I got to tell you, I struggle with this because so many of the people who are involved in the same process of being publicly declaring the evidence for Christianity, or making a case for Christianity, or trying to defend Christianity in the public square, are my good friends who would say, hey, you need to be more active and talk about these hot topic political issues. And I have resisted that. And I wonder sometimes, well, look, I know that my Christian worldview absolutely affects every decision I make in every realm of my life. It makes decisions.
Yeah,
There's stuff that we just won't watch, for example, when it comes to some of these comedies. Like, we'll go through them. I went through them last night. We're going through a few of them. We're just going, okay, what? No, we're not going to watch that, because we find it to be so offensive to our Christian sensibilities that we're just not going to watch it. And this is true, I think, for everyone. But I do struggle with it, because I know that, like how, I guess I'm just trying not, the gospel I think is the cure, and I just don't want to inhibit the gospel. And so that's why, for the most part, I've said, hey, the very people who I want to reach with the gospel, because the gospel would change everything, are the very people who will stop listening to me if I start to take my stands and attach my identity to some movement, some political movement, something other than the gospel. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't remember if it was a specific. Maybe it was a specific person I was talking to. I can't really remember the specific conversation, but I just have noticed this with a number of different Christians that I know either very well or just kind of I can see from afar, where they're starting to have issues with things that are not really strictly about Christianity, but because they're having doubts about like a political position that they know a lot of Christians hold, or a political candidate. It's more, I think it's actually even more, less the political position, but more the particular likability of a candidate, or the way that they see Christians treat other people who disagree with them politically, that then they start to have doubts about Christianity. Like, I think it would be one thing to have a doubt about Christianity and say, hey, I've been really thinking about this philosophically, and I just don't understand how, like the problem of evil, how could a good God exist? This is a question that comes right down to Christianity.
Right.
But now I'm starting to see Christians who are saying, oh man, all the Christians I know want to associate with this person, and I don't like them. I don't think they have good character. And I might even agree with them. Yeah, that person doesn't have good character. But because of that, they're saying, oh, well, since you associate with that person that I don't like, now I'm having doubts about the fundamental faith that we have. And it doesn't really have anything necessarily to do strictly with the faith, but because so many Christians are all saying the same thing and they disagree with that one thing that may not even have anything to do with Christianity, now they're worried that they can no longer associate with the faith itself.
Well, when you say associate, they're really talking about I don't want to. And Jeff put it this way. Jeff Myers, when we did this interview last week, talking about we talked about identity. Jeff, is the president of Summit Worldview, and we're on his podcast. And he says, yeah, I asked him about this, if he thought the high schoolers are less likely to want to if identity is an issue, as a way in which we decide if we want to be involved with something, to believe something, to embrace something, to follow something. And he says, yeah, he definitely sees it. It's like, do I want it on my T-shirt? That's what he said. And I thought that's a really good point, because, do I want to identify with this on my T-shirt? Because, and I've got some stuff. I've got a cap that I wear when I fly, and on the back of it, it has Jesus on the back of the brim, on the back of the cap. And I often think, when I wear that cap, I know that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to say, well, that I already know. They think they know who I am and what I'm about and what I like and dislike, and they have an opinion of me, which they have formed a view. So I do take on this identity, and it has nothing to do with Jesus, it turns out. It has to do usually with how Jesus has been identified in the culture and who he's been identified with in the culture.
Yeah, I think it's tough. Like, when I think about the majority of people that I interact with, well, see, maybe it's different for depending on where you're living. For us, we're in Southern California. The majority of people I interact with on a daily basis are not Christians. So if I want to experience, like, hey, what are Christians talking about today? The easiest way is to go on the internet or go to a group that's outside of like my own personal life. But I think that we haven't always been great about the way that we are publicly, like if I look at Christians on Twitter, I will see Christians being rude to each other, not having great character even within Christianity, let alone with those outside. Now, if I look at the Christians I know in my actual life, I don't really see that. But because the majority of people that I personally see that are Christians are unlikable, I could understand why one of my neighbors who's not a Christian at all, probably has no Christians or few in their own life that they talk to, and their only experience of Christians are what they see on television or the depictions of in the media, or what they're seeing people who say they're Christians are acting online. If that's unlikable, why would you want to investigate any further?
Well, and this is
I don't even think, like, we should at least hopefully be acting in a way that people go, okay, that's likable enough. What is it even that they believe? But I think so many people are turned off by, like, oh, that's so ugly. Why would I even want to know what those people believe? It's not worth my time. I'm just going to move on.
Well, and this is why. So look, I think there's a couple things about that. I block and mute thousands of people on Twitter. And they usually are people who are in two categories. All the bots, all the porn, profiles that they'll follow you or whatever, and just trying to build their own profile. So I block all those, of course, and I also block. It was like just profane and vile and just trying to provoke us into a fight. But you can also mute on Twitter, and you'll do this on other platforms too. I probably as many Christians as non-Christians, because they are just really ugly online. I mean, they're saying things that I would be embarrassed I just don't want to hear it. I don't want to. So I just have to block or mute it, so that I'm not constantly hearing this aggressive, unbecoming behavior online. I think we've amplified it, right? Isn't it interesting that this identity issue is, for your generation, is going to be a lot more difficult than it was for mine, because we didn't have an automatic the social media platforms. What's the first thing you do? You have a bio. How are you identified? What are your pronouns? What is your priority of things you want to be known for? This is all in your bio. We didn't have, 30 years ago, how would you know these things? How would you know anyone's, like, you're now wearing your identity on your sleeve in a way that's
Yeah,
even
you had to
more.
actually get to know somebody to know
Yeah,
what it
you
was
have
they were
to,
about.
right? So now
Yeah.
this is like the thing that we lead with. Here's your picture or an icon that identifies you want to be known, identified with the Satan horns or whatever it is you're identifying with. I don't know. I think that's part of it, and I think that there's a couple of outcomes there. I wonder if this is really the deterioration of an understanding of objective truth. I think is part of this, and here's why I say that. It's everyone's got their own personal truth, their subjective view of what's important, what's not important, and they are crafting their own identity. And they really want everyone wants their own. You said something really good when you said, like, everyone wants to be the star of their own movie, or to be this. I forget how you said it, but there's a we in order to be the star, you have to have something unique about you that identifies you in a way that's above the rest. And I think you're right about there. We were talking earlier. There's a Geico commercial where at the end of the commercial, the female, who's, I guess, the female character in the commercial says that she's an introvert, and how rare that is, that she's an introvert, and that little gecko lizard says, I don't think that's true, that it's rare to be an introvert. But she's like, oh no, it's rare. And it's because a sense that whatever our identity is that we've accepted for ourselves, we want it to be special, to be
Yeah.
unique. And if everyone thinks there's nothing objectively true in which to identify with, in other words, if even Jesus, to be a
Yeah.
Christ follower, to be in Christ, means whatever I think of Jesus, and there's 7 billion people on the planet who could think something different about Jesus, like, have we lost it because there is no sense that there's
Yeah.
anything objectively true?
I actually I definitely disagree with I think that there was a time in which there was like a growing postmodernism, and I think that there's definitely a lot of remnants of that, of this idea that is there objective truth or not. But I think I actually already see us moving out of that back to an idea of that there is truth and then people value truth. But I think that the issue is that what we believe is true now might be different than 50 years ago, and maybe we went from a position of believing in certain truths, then we got to an area where we thought is anything true? I think we're actually coming back on the other side. And the reason I say that is I think that there are, while maybe there is a wider range of things that you could identify with today than maybe in the past. I don't know if it's true or not, but let's just say that it is for the sake of argument. There's things that people will not identify with because they think that those are poor identities. There's something wrong to identify with something that they believe is evil, immoral, is whatever, is distasteful for whatever reason. So while somebody might say, hey, there's 100 ways to identify that are all equal, and maybe we agree with that or not, they would still say there's something that we should not identify with.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is that Christianity is becoming one of those things that we should not identify with. That's the perception of some people.
Yeah, so it's not
the
about...
question is, are they rejecting Christian identity because of something that is actually intrinsic to the Christian faith, or are they rejecting Christianity because what they see from the outside is distasteful? If you look at like the early days of Christianity, when you look at like what the Romans were saying about the Christians, Romans had all these crazy ideas about Christians, that we were cannibals because we said we ate the Lord's Supper. That we had Jesus' flesh and blood.
Yeah.
And so they had so it's easy for the Roman to reject the small Christian cult, at that time, saying, "Oh, those are just cannibals. You don't even need to listen to them." But if they actually get to see what's going on, they might realize, okay, actually, it's not as distasteful as we thought.
And when they did see it, they would say that, oh, these people love each other in a way. So yeah, they had a
yes,
a
it made it easier. Once they actually got to know these Christians, it made it easier and easier to identify with them, and harder to reject them. And I wonder, as Christians, listen, maybe some of this is truly outside of our control, and it's just this is a growing cultural movement against us, and we can't do it. But I wonder, are the things we're doing really making it easier or harder for people to identify with us? And I don't think that that means that we have to move away from theological positions in order to become more popular. But I wonder if we can hold on to our theological truths, but is there other things that we could do with our own character, the way we interact with people, that could make things a little bit more palatable? Because there's plenty of Christianity that we can't get rid of that is going to be maybe concerning for the world around us.
Yeah, but that assumes though that it's all about our behavior, and I think it's deeper than that. I think that all the things that the culture now is pointing to and saying, misogyny, racism, transphobia, homophobia, all these things that they will say that are being taught by the God of the New Testament or the God of the Old Testament. But the point is that this is not that as Jeff said it this way when in the interview last week, he said, it's not about the godness of God, it's about the goodness of God. Like the case for God is not so much as it is compelling right now as whether or not that God is actually good. And so I think that's, and by the way, I could be the nicest person in the world, but if you think that, but every historic character who was a slave owning, racist, misogynist jerk happened to also be serving as a deacon in a church somewhere, well, then this is the problem. The one thing they all have in common is they had a source of knowledge, the New Testament. Now, of course, you and I would say, well, actually, all the abolitionists use the same text, right? So it's clear that this isn't what Christianity teaches on any of those areas. But you know, the same way that a progressive Christian can manipulate the text, take it out of context to make a case, a pro-homosexuality case from Scripture, where they're saying, no, this is perfectly legitimate and perfectly fine based on the Scripture. If they can distort these kinds of claims, they can certainly distort it in the opposite way to show that everything that Christianity teaches is whatever they consider to be the negative of the day. So I don't even think you could be the nicest. So let's put it this way. I could be the nicest self-identified Nazi I could possibly be, but if the view of Nazism is negative, or it should be, then I don't care how nice I am. They view this worldview. Like, I don't even bother making a case for it because it's an ugly thing. Maybe you can make a case, but it's still ugly, and we would not want to be that. So therefore, we don't care about your case, and we don't care about your behavior. We think that the foundational thing is bad.
I don't think that it has to be one or the other, though. It's that we either make a case for the truth or we're nice. If we are only one or the other, something is going to be lost. If we're always making the case for truth, but we're doing it in a way which is not winsome, then nobody's going to hear what we have to say. If we're being super nice but never speaking the truth, then absolutely, nobody's going to hear the truth, because even if they heard us, we're not saying the truth. But we certainly need to have both components. I don't think to say, hey, we need to be more tactful in our approach means that we're jettisoning the truth. But we need to make better if we have the truth, then we need to make arguments in a way that people will actually hear us. But I don't think it's that people have rejected the truth altogether, so they're just going with whatever they feel. I think that the people are accepting of the truth. They just don't think that we have it. So now we need to figure out a way to communicate it to them. That no, the truth is over here, and what we have is worth identifying in.
So do you honestly think anymore that, like, your younger siblings or anyone who's in that Gen Z category gives a lick about an evidential case for this? Or do we have to start? I mean, in other words, where do you start?
Well, I think it depends how we're defining evidential. Because certainly everybody comes to their beliefs through some means. There's there's things that they consider to be evidence, and the evidence might just be their personal experience with Christians, or what they perceive as Christians. It might not even be true about Christians, but what they perceive, their own intuitions, their own reasoning. These are all pieces of evidence that they use to come to their conclusions, whether they think of it as evidential or not. I don't know if it's possible to really escape evidence. The question is, how are they thinking about it now, and then what can we say to them that they'll actually hear? Maybe, you might be right that the way we argued, publicly argued 100 years ago, is no longer effective. But I mean, that's probably true for most things. Like, if you read a book from 100 years ago, it might not be as interesting as a book that was written now.
So this is why
for Gen Z.
Yeah.
But we got to figure out a way to say the same things, but in a way that the current generation can hear it.
So we should start thinking about that, because I think, I do these reality conferences with Stand to Reason, and we do 6 a year all high schoolers. We're going to see probably 12,000 high schoolers this year. The last one's coming up this weekend. So by the time we post this, the season will be completed. And I'll tell you that it is changing the way. So as a guy who himself was convinced by the evidence, whenever I would talk about Jesus, it would always be through the lens of the evidence. And as I get older, I don't think I'm ever going to do a presentation again where I don't preach the gospel at some point at the end of it. So sometimes they don't ask for that. They want you to come in and you're at an apologetics conference and they just want it. I'm not making the assumption anymore that there are people in those conferences who are that everyone there is saved. I'm not making that assumption anymore. So I think as I get older, I realize that, hey, I can make the case to Opa, your grandfather, till I'm blue in the face. At some point, I've got to make sure I articulate the gospel and stop just making the case. Stop trying to remove walls. Just present the gospel. The power of the Holy Spirit through the gospel is pretty amazing. And I got to stop thinking that it's always just about a 5-point case. So that means, though, that I got to figure out how to articulate it. And when I think that, so I'm trying to figure out, so what role does identity play if a lot of your decision making is made from the point of, do I want to wear this T-shirt or not? How does that change the way we present the gospel? Because the gospel is very simple. It's about sin and a savior and forgiveness. It's really, that's what it is. But there is an aspect, I think we have to at least, one of the walls I think people have constructed in front of that simple message is this issue of identity. And so I think we have to at least, it's not, I never thought it was an either or. I always thought it was a both and. We have to do both. It's not a matter of saying I'm shifting away from something towards something else. It's about a more robust way to. So I'm not sure if you even thought about how you're going to include it.
Yeah, I mean,
if you're not going to include it.
The question, I think that the idea that there is an identity, there's something you would not want to identify with, kind of suggests that there must be some objective standard by which identities can be measured against one another. And if that's the case, then there must be a maximally great identity, one thing which is greater than all others. So if that's the case, then the question is just what is the best thing to identify with? I don't even think it's a matter of where you can only hold one identity. I hold an identity as your son, as a member of our family. That has certain meaning. I hold identity from profession and from whatever. But what's the most important thing for me to identify with? What's the beyond all things? What's the thing that I should most identify with? And I think Christianity, that's the answer for me. Christianity is the greatest thing to identify with. But I think we'd need to make the case. But I don't know if you were talking about, hey, what's the usefulness of making a 5-point evidential case? But I don't know. I guess I've been thinking more and more, I'm not sure in what way the 5-point quote-unquote evidential case is different from the sharing of the gospel. I actually think that sharing the gospel is an evidential case. You're presenting something that you believe is meaningful, and it's up to the listener to determine whether or not that is how meaningful that piece of evidence is, your gospel message. I think there's a lot of things that we just don't typically think of as evidence, which truly are evidence, like our personal experience, our own previously held beliefs, our feelings about our beliefs. These are all pieces of evidence. They may or may not, they may be more or less valuable in answering any particular question, but they're all evidence. So I think I don't know in what way anybody comes to Christianity that's not evidential, but different evidences are going to be more meaningful to different people because we're all trying to answer different questions.
Yeah, I think
So if the question is what should we identify with, then there's reasons why we should identify with Christianity over other things. But we need to be able to communicate that in a way that people hear. I think that Christianity provides actual objective value to human life. I think that we're seeing that the world around us is very clear that human life has value. I mean, that's when we're talking about oppression and the subjugation of any people. Mm-hmm. That's the reason that's wrong is because human life has value. But I think only Christianity or only theism, I guess, could ground the value of human life. So if you're not, if you're an atheist, we're going to have a really hard time explaining it. But Christianity can help you understand why should we value human life? Why should we stop the subjugation of minorities?
It's not even every form of theism that would ground this properly, because there are many forms of theism in which humans are not created in the image of God and have any higher value than the tree sitting in our backyard, right? I mean, so
yeah, I think evil also is such an important thing that everybody's talking about. Everybody really right now is focused on the injustices of the world, which is important. I mean, I'm with them. But only one worldview, only Christianity could actually give an answer to injustice. Every worldview talks about evil, but only Christianity has a mechanism by which evil people could be redeemed.
Yeah, no kidding.
Because every other worldview is going to make you work towards it. You just got to work till you're better. Just keep trying until you're perfect, except for Christianity. So I think Christianity does have value.
No,
For
of course.
The current world, but we need to figure out now. I explained to you how I think about it, but now I got to figure out a way to communicate those truths to the people around me, and part of that is just going to be about being winsome.
Yeah, well, I can tell you
Breaking down
this.
some of these barriers.
And I think we've spent so much time working in the evidence that I think people probably think, and I've always talked about how experience itself is not sufficient. And I've talked about that 1,000 different times, but I think that they've misinterpreted that. People have misinterpreted it to me that I don't think that experience is evidence, but of course it is. I've always just said that you have to test your experiences because everyone's got an experience. And an untested experience could just be an emotional response to something. We have to test all of our experiences, but experience is direct. And so you're the eyewitness then to something. And this is a very important form of evidence. But the question is, we don't just accept what eyewitnesses say. We test them. You should test ourselves. If we're the eyewitness, I don't just accept what I think I experienced. I've got to test it. So the same way I would test any eyewitness. But anyway, my point is, I just think this is shifting. And I think that part of the palette, like the tools we have in our toolbox when we share the gospel, we might have said, hey, there is your personal experience. There is the evidence from history. But one of the things we're going to add to our toolbox is the role that identity plays. Look, this is a huge part of the Christian story anyway, right? Abram and Sarai, they become the first disciples. They become the Jewish nation, and their names are immediately changed. Peter says that he's Simon, and then he identifies Jesus as the Messiah. He's now Peter. I mean, we change, and names are one of the first ways that we identify ourselves. We are said to be in Christ. Our identity has changed. We are now sons and daughters of a holy God. Your identity changes. You don't become a husband until you get married. Right? Then you have a new identity. Well, you don't become a son of God until you accept Christ as Savior, and now you are in a family in which Jesus is a sibling. This is something that changes your identity. I think identity is part of this story, and we're going to have to start to include it. I just think because what I'm seeing is that more people will talk about, and I think social media has amplified this, their identity, before all other things. And then now it seems to have some of the highest value to people is what is their identity. And they want you to know what their identity is, and they want to be the individual creator of their identity. They don't want to adopt an identity that somebody else presents to them. They'd much rather craft their own. And so in that kind of a world, that's a new obstacle for us. Because we're suggesting that there's a transcendent historic identity which is eternal and timeless in Christ. But you don't get to decide who Jesus is. You don't get to shape that identity. All you can do is accept it, is bend your knee to it. And I wonder if it's harder for people to do that now in a generation in which they are so accustomed to forming their own identity. It can change tomorrow. You can change that identity week to week. And I get bored, so I'll change my identity on the basis of boredom. Well, this is something that's very different than that, right? This is something that's unchanging, that is transcendent. And if we put our trust in it, by the way, though, I think it solves all of the stress and the stuff there is a practical benefit for placing your identity in something that transcends your own experience or your own preferences, in that there's a sense of a historic and ancient calm that comes with that identity. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it might be just important for me, or maybe one of the things I think about when I say I want to identify with Christianity is that when I say that, I really mean the core tenets of the faith, the essentials, the essential doctrines of Christianity. But sometimes I see, or maybe this is just my perception, is that people will try to argue about things because they think that they're defending Christianity, but they will try to argue about things which are not strictly Christian, like how should we dress? Should we have tattoos or not have tattoos?
Yeah.
What's like the proper etiquette at a dinner table? There's
Yeah.
things that are traditional that maybe they have value. I'm not saying that they don't, but are not really strictly Christian. But then when the culture moves away from them, I think people, it's like we're seeing the culture move away from Christianity, and we're also seeing the culture change in terms of its customs. And sometimes we're like really quick to protect like the old customs, which really have nothing to do with Christianity, but out of fear that it's all one and the same. But when I look at Christianity, I want to defend just the faith itself. If the whole world changes around us, but Christianity stays the same, then things are good. I'm sure that the Christians in 1000 AD who are living under a monarchy, maybe some of them wouldn't have liked the idea of going to like a democracy because it's so foreign to them. They would have seen it as like a death to their way of life. But Christianity has flourished in a democracy up till this point, maybe not anymore. But we saw it strong under a democracy. And so there's certain things about our way of life that are not strictly tied to Christianity that whether those stay or go, I don't want to be too worried about. I want to be focused just on Christianity. Let me defend the core tenets of the faith, and everything else in the world can rise or fall. And I'm not going to be too worried about that.
Well, that's a good place probably for us to leave it for this week. Real good. I'm looking forward to having another discussion next week. Have a great week, son. Stay out of trouble and be safe. And I'll talk.
Why you put it like that?
I know.
It's like a bad omen.
You're never in trouble. I know. You're the one I'm never ever worried about. So anyway, good to talk to you, and I'll talk to you again next week.
Okay, I'll see you.
To hear more from J. Warner Wallace, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. For more information on this week's topic, visit youtube.com/coldcasechristianity with J. Warner Wallace. Thank you for joining us on this Cold Case Christianity broadcast.